The summer heat in Fort Worth was unbearable that day in 1878. Dust clouds danced across the railroad tracks as the afternoon sun beat down on everything in sight. Jacob Brennan climbed down from his wagon, his boots hitting the wooden platform with a heavy thud. At nearly 7 feet tall, he was used to people staring. But today he had more important things on his mind than curious looks. He needed supplies for his ranch. Coffee, salt, ammunition, and a new set of horseshoes. The kind of things that kept a man alive out in the middle of nowhere. His ranch was a full day's ride from town, and he only made this trip when he absolutely had to. Jacob preferred the quiet of his land to the noise and chatter of civilization. The depot was busier than usual. Travelers waited on wooden benches, fanning themselves with newspapers and complaining about the heat. A group of businessmen in fancy suits argued loudly about cattle prices. Children ran around their mothers' long skirts, getting scolded for making too much noise. But something else was happening near the far end of the platform that caught Jacob's attention. A crowd had gathered around someone sitting on the ground. Their voices carried across the depot, and none of them sounded happy. Jacob could hear fragments of angry conversation drifting his way. Words like savage and problem and what are we supposed to do with her made his jaw tighten. He had heard that kind of talk before, and it never led anywhere good. His curiosity got the better of him. Jacob walked toward the commotion, each step making the wooden planks creak under his weight. As he got closer, he could see what had everyone so worked up. A young woman sat against a large shipping crate, her back straight despite everything happening around her. She wore traditional Comanche clothing that had seen better days. Her long black hair was braided but messy, and dirt streaked her bronze skin. But what struck Jacob most was her eyes. They weren't filled with fear or defeat like he might have expected. Instead, they burned with quiet defiance. The depot manager, a thin man with a nervous mustache, was waving his hands around like he was trying to shoo away a stray dog. "Look, I don't know how she got here or where she came from," he was saying to anyone who would listen. "But I can't have her sitting around my depot all day. It's bad for business." "Someone should contact the authorities," suggested a woman in a blue dress. "They'll know what to do with her." "Send her back to the reservation where she belongs," added a man in a cowboy hat. "That's where all of them are supposed to be anyway." An older gentleman with a silver pocket watch shook his head. "The next train to anywhere useful doesn't come through for 3 days. We can't just leave her here that long." The woman on the ground understood every word they were saying. Jacob could tell by the way her shoulders tensed and her hands clenched into fists. She was listening to people discuss her fate like she was a piece of unwanted cargo, and it was making her angry. He didn't blame her one bit. "Maybe she's dangerous," whispered someone in the crowd. "You never know with these people." That comment made Jacob's blood boil. He had spent enough time on the frontier to know that danger came in all shapes and sizes, and it usually had nothing to do with the color of someone's skin or the clothes they wore. Some of the most dangerous men he had ever met wore expensive suits and smiled while they lied to your face, the depot manager noticed Jacob's approach and immediately looked relieved. When you were dealing with a problem you couldn't solve, having a giant on your side seemed like a good idea. "Mr. Brennan, thank goodness you're here. Maybe you can help us figure out what to do about this situation." Jacob looked down at the woman. She met his gaze without flinching, studying his face like she was trying to figure out what kind of man he was. He had seen that look before in wild animals that were cornered but not beaten. It was the look of someone who would fight if they had to, but who was smart enough to wait and see what was coming first. "What's the situation?" Jacob asked, though he already knew the answer. "She just showed up here this morning," the depot manager explained. "Won't say much except that she speaks some English and Spanish. Claims she got separated from some group that was being moved somewhere. I don't know if that's true or not, but I can't have her camping out at my depot indefinitely." Jacob knelt down so he was closer to the woman's eye level. Even crouching, he was still taller than most men standing up, but it felt more respectful somehow. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated for a moment, then answered in clear English with only a slight accent. Ayana. That's, pretty name. What does it mean? Eternal blossom. Her voice was steady, but Jakob could hear the exhaustion underneath it. How long have you been here, Ayana? Since the sun came up. Maybe longer? She gestured toward the crowd around them. These people want me to disappear, but they cannot agree on how to make that happen. Jakob almost smiled at that. She had summed up the situation perfectly. Where were you trying to go? Ayana's composure cracked just a little. I was with my family. We were being moved to a new place by soldiers. There was confusion during a river crossing. Some of us got separated. I have been walking for days, trying to find them or find my way back home. The crowd was getting impatient with Jakob's questions. Look, we don't have time for a whole life story, the man in the cowboy hat interrupted. The point is, she can't. Stay here. Someone needs to take responsibility for her. Send her to the mission? Suggested the woman in blue. They take in all kinds of strays. The mission's full up, the depot manager replied. Asked them yesterday about a different matter. Jakob stood up slowly, his mind working through the problem. Ayana watched him carefully, probably wondering if this giant was going to be another person who made decisions about her life without asking what she wanted. The crowd was looking at him expectantly, like he might have some magical solution. That would make their problem disappear. The truth was, Jakob did have a solution. It wasn't magical, and it probably wasn't what anyone expected, but it was simple and direct. That was how he preferred to handle most things in life. You're coming with me, he said to Ayana, extending his hand toward her. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Everyone stared at him like he had just announced he was planning to fly to the moon. The depot manager's mouth fell open. The woman in blue looked scandalized. Even Ayana seemed surprised by his directness. Now hold on just a minute, the man in the cowboy hat said. You can't just take her. There are procedures for this kind of thing, legal considerations. Jakob turned to face the man, using his full height to make a point. What procedures? What? Legal considerations? She's not a criminal. She's not a piece of property. She's a person who needs help, and I'm offering to help her. But you don't know anything about her, the woman in blue protested. She could be ... well, you just don't know. I know she's been sitting here all day while a bunch of strangers argued about what to do with her life, Jakob replied. I know. She's tired and hungry and probably scared, even if she's too proud to show it. And I know that talking about her like she's not even here is the rudest thing I've seen in a long time. He looked back down at Ayana, his hand still extended. My ranch is about a day's ride from here. You can stay as long as you need to figure out your next move. No strings attached. If you want to leave tomorrow or next week or next month, that's your choice. Ayana studied his face for a long moment. Jakob could almost see her weighing her. Options: stay at the depot and hope these people eventually decided to help her instead of just arguing about her. Try to make it on her own with no money, no horse, and no clear idea of where to go. Or trust this strange giant who had just offered her shelter without asking for anything in return. Slowly, she reached up and took his hand. Jakob helped her to her feet, and she brushed the dust off her clothing with as much dignity as she could. Manage, well, I never, huffed the woman in blue. The impropriety of it all. Jakob ignored her and picked up Ayana's small bundle of possessions. It wasn't much. A worn blanket, a leather pouch, and what looked like a few pieces of dried meat wrapped in cloth. Everything she owned in the world could fit in his 2 hands. Thank you, Ayana said quietly as they walked toward his wagon. Jakob nodded. Everyone deserves a chance to get back on their feet. As they climbed onto the wagon seat, Jakob could feel the eyes of the crowd following them. He could hear whispered conversations starting up behind them, full of speculation and judgment. Let them talk, he thought. He had made his decision, and he was comfortable with it. Ayana settled onto the wagon seat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance but no longer looking like she expected the worst from every person she met. As Jakob guided his horses, Away from the depot, she turned to look back at the crowd one more time. They were afraid of me, she observed. People are often afraid of things they don't understand, Jacob replied. Doesn't make them bad people, just makes them people. As Fort Worth disappeared behind them in a cloud of dust, neither Jacob nor Ayana could have imagined how much this simple act of kindness would change both of their lives. The wagon wheels creaked steadily as they rolled away from Fort Worth. Jacob kept his horses at an easy pace, not wanting to push them too hard in the afternoon heat. Ayana sat beside him on the wooden seat, her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't said a word since they left the depot, and Jacob wasn't the type to fill silence with empty chatter. The Texas landscape stretched out in front of them like a brown and green carpet that went on forever. Rolling hills covered in tall grass swayed in the hot breeze. Occasionally they passed a lone tree or a creek bed that might have water in it during the rainy season. But mostly it was just open country, the kind of place where a person could ride for hours without seeing another soul. Jacob liked it that way. He had come to Texas specifically looking for empty space where he could build something with his own hands. After growing up in crowded German villages where everyone knew everyone else's business, the wide-open frontier felt like freedom. But now, glancing over at his passenger, he wondered if all this emptiness might seem frightening to someone who was already lost and far from home. How far? Ayana asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. And wagon wheels to my place? We'll get there tomorrow afternoon if we keep moving steady. Might take longer if we run into any trouble. What kind of trouble? Jacob shrugged. Could be anything out here. Bad weather, lame horse, broken wheel. Sometimes there are men who think they own other people's cattle. I try to avoid that kind of problem when I can. Ayana nodded like she understood exactly what he meant. My people have the same kind of problems. Different men, same greed. That was the most she had said since they started traveling, and Jacob found himself curious about her story. But he had learned that pushing people to talk before they were ready usually made them clam up even tighter. So he just kept driving and let the silence stretch out between them again. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky when they came to a creek that actually had water in it. Jacob pulled the wagon to a stop under the shade of a big cottonwood tree. Horses need a drink, he explained. Might as well rest here for a bit. He climbed down from the wagon and started unhitching the team. Ayana watched him work for a moment, then slipped down from her seat and walked to the creek's edge. She knelt by the water and cupped her hands to drink, then splashed some on her face and neck. The simple act seemed to refresh her more than Jacob would have expected. This is good water, she said when he joined her at the creek. Clean and cold. The creek near my village had water like this. Where was your village? Jacob asked as he let his horses drink their fill. Ayana pointed toward the west, where the sun was painting the sky orange and pink. Many days that way. In the hills where the buffalo used to graze before the white hunters came. There was sadness in her voice, but also something harder. Not bitterness exactly, but a kind of acceptance that bad things happened and you had to keep living anyway. Jacob recognized that feeling because he carried some of it himself. What happened to your family? He asked gently. Ayana was quiet for so long that Jacob thought she might not answer. Then she started talking, her voice soft but steady. The soldiers came last month. They said all Comanche people had to move to the new reservation. They said it was for our own good, for our protection. But the place they wanted to take us was far from our hunting grounds, far from the graves of our ancestors. She picked up a smooth stone from the creek bed and turned it over in her hands. Some of our men wanted to fight. Others said we should go peacefully and try to make the best of it. The arguments went on for days. Finally, our chief decided we would go rather than see our children caught in a war. Jacob pulled some jerky and hardtack from his supplies and offered her half. She accepted it with a small nod of thanks. The journey was hard, she continued. Many of our old people and small children could not walk fast enough. The soldiers grew impatient. When we reached the river crossing, there was confusion. Some of the horses panicked. People scattered. In all the noise and shouting, families got separated. She threw the smooth stone into the creek and watched. The ripples spread out from where it landed. I was helping my grandmother across when her horse stumbled. By the time I got her safely to the other side, the soldiers had moved the main group forward. I could not find my parents or my brothers. I followed the trail for 2 days, but I'm only one person on foot, and they had horses and wagons. So you went to the depot hoping to find them there. I hoped someone there might know which way the soldiers took my people. Or maybe I could find word about other groups that had passed through. Instead, I found people who looked at me like I was a wild animal that had wandered into their town. Jakob finished his jerky and offered her more, but she shook her head. I'm sorry about your family, he said. That's a hard thing to go through. Ilyana looked at him with those sharp, intelligent eyes. You speak like someone who knows about losing family. Jakob was surprised by her directness, but he found himself answering honestly. Lost my parents and my younger sister to fever back. In Germany, that's part of why I came to America. Too many memories in the old place. And now you live alone on your ranch. Seemed like the right choice at the time, simpler anyway. They sat by the creek as the sun continued to set, sharing the comfortable quiet that sometimes develops between two people who have both known real loss. Jakob found himself studying Ayana's profile as she watched the water flow past. There was strength in the set of her jaw and the way she held her shoulders. Whatever she had been through, it hadn't broken her spirit. Tell me about this ranch of yours, she said eventually. Jakob smiled a little. Not much to tell yet. I've got a house, a barn, some corrals for the horses and cattle. Been working on it for about 3 years now. It's not fancy, but it's solid. You built it all yourself? Most of it. Had some help raising the barn roof, but yeah, mostly just me and my hands. He flexed his fingers, which were permanently stained with dirt and calloused from years of hard work. That must be satisfying, Ayana said. To build something from nothing with your own effort. It is. Every nail I drive, every fence post I set, it's mine because I put it there. Nobody can take that away from me. As darkness settled over the prairie, Jakob built a small fire and they made camp under the cottonwood tree. He had brought along a canvas tarp that he stretched between the wagon and a low branch to give them some shelter. Ayana helped gather firewood without being asked, moving quietly through the gathering dusk like someone who was completely comfortable in wild places. You don't have to worry about me trying to run off in the night, she said, as they settled down on opposite sides of the fire. I have nowhere to run to, and besides, you have been kind to me when you didn't have to be. The thought never crossed my mind, Jakob lied. The truth was, he had been wondering if she might slip away while he slept. Not because he wanted to stop her, but because he had started to hope she wouldn't. Why did you help me today? She asked suddenly. Those people at the depot, they would have found some solution eventually. You could have walked away. Jakob poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral up into the star-filled sky. I guess I don't like seeing people treated poorly for things they can't control. Nobody chooses where they're born or what they look like or what happens to their family. Seemed wrong to punish you for circumstances that weren't your fault. Many people would disagree with you about that. Many people are wrong about a lot of things. Ayana smiled for the first time since he had met her. It transformed her whole face, making her look younger and less guarded. You are not what I expected when I first saw you. What did you expect? A giant white man with big hands and a stern face? I thought you might be like the soldiers. Quick to use force, slow to listen, Jakob chuckled. Well, I am big and white and my hands are pretty large. And I probably do have a stern face most of the time. But I learned a long time ago that force usually makes problems worse, not better. How did you learn that? Hard way. When I was younger, I thought being big meant I had to solve everything with my fists. Got me into more trouble than it got me out of. Finally figured out that most problems need thinking, not hitting. The fire crackled between them, and night sounds began to emerge from the darkness. Crickets chirping, an owl calling somewhere in the distance, the soft snuffling of his horses as they grazed nearby. It was peaceful in a way that Jacob rarely experienced when he was around other people. "Tomorrow we will reach your ranch," Ayana said. "That's right. And then what happens?" Jacob considered the question carefully. "Then you decide what you want to do next. You can rest up, get your strength back, maybe figure out how to find your family. Or if you want to try something else entirely, that's your choice too." "You would let me stay even though you don't know me?" "I'd let you stay because I don't know you. Everyone deserves a chance to show who they really are, not who other people think they should be." Ayana was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but certain. "I think maybe you are a good man, Jacob Brennan." "I try to be," he replied. "Don't always succeed, but I try." The morning sun was already warm when Jacob woke up beside the dying embers of their campfire. Ayana was already awake, sitting cross-legged by the creek with her back to him. She seemed to be doing some kind of morning ritual, her hands moving in slow, deliberate patterns while she spoke quietly in her native language. Jacob didn't want to interrupt, so he busied himself rolling up his bedroll and getting the horses ready for the final stretch to his ranch. When Ayana joined him at the wagon, she seemed more relaxed than she had the day before. "Good morning," she said simply, and Jacob noticed that some of the tension had left her shoulders. "Morning. Sleep all right?" "Better than I have in weeks." The sound of the water was peaceful. They made good time that morning. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled, the flat grassland giving way to rolling hills dotted with oak trees. Jacob found himself pointing out landmarks as they went. A distinctive rock formation, a bend in a distant river, a hill, where he had once seen a family of deer grazing at sunset. He realized he was nervous about showing Ayana his home, though he couldn't quite say why. It was early afternoon when they crested a low hill, and Jacob's ranch spread out before them. In the valley below, he pulled the wagon to a stop so Ayana could get her first good look at the place that had consumed 3 years of his life. The house sat in the center of the valley, a simple wooden structure with a stone chimney and a covered porch that faced east to catch the morning sun. It wasn't large, but it looked solid and well built. Behind the house stood a good-sized barn with a new coat of red paint, and beyond that were several corrals where a few horses grazed in the afternoon heat. A vegetable garden stretched along the south side of the house, though from this distance it was hard to tell how well it was doing. "This is yours?" Ayana asked, and Jacob couldn't tell from her tone what she thought of it. "Every board and nail," he confirmed. "Took me most of a year just to clear the land and get the foundation set for the house. It looks peaceful. That was the idea. After living in crowded places most of my life, I wanted somewhere I could hear myself think." They drove down into the valley, and Jacob felt a familiar sense of satisfaction as they approached his home. 3 years ago, this had been empty grassland. Now, it was starting to look like a real ranch, the kind of place where a man could build a life. The horses in the corral whinnied a greeting as they pulled up to the house. Jacob's dog, a mixed-breed animal he had found as a stray puppy, came bounding around the corner of the barn with his tail wagging furiously. The dog stopped short when he saw Ayana, tilting his head curiously but showing no signs of aggression. "That's Ranger," Jacob explained as he climbed down from the wagon. "He's not much of a guard dog, but he's good company." Ayana extended her hand toward the dog, who approached cautiously and sniffed her fingers before deciding she was acceptable. Soon he was leaning against her leg, begging for attention. "Animals know good people," Jacob observed as he started. Unloading supplies from the wagon. Jacob showed Ayana around the property, starting with the barn where he kept his tools and equipment. She seemed genuinely interested in how he had built everything, asking practical questions about the construction and nodding approvingly at his workmanship. When they got to the house, he hesitated at the front door. "I should probably warn you. It's not fancy inside. I built it for function, not for looks." The interior of the house was indeed simple but comfortable. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with Jacob's few books arranged on a shelf beside it. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, a wooden table and chairs. A rocking chair by the fireplace, a simple couch covered with a colorful blanket he had bought from a Mexican trader. "There's a spare room back there," Jacob said, pointing toward a doorway at the rear of the house. "It's small, but it has a window and a good bed. You're welcome to use it for as long as you need." Ayana walked to the window and looked out at the garden behind the house. "You grow your own food?" "I try to. I'm not much of a farmer, but I manage to keep myself fed. Mostly potatoes, beans, onions, and whatever else will grow in this soil." She studied the garden with the eye of someone who knew about growing things. "Your plants look thirsty. And you have beetles eating your bean leaves." Jacob joined her. "At the window, I noticed the beetles. Haven't figured out what to do about them yet?" "There are ways to deal with such problems without poisoning the earth," Ayana said. "My grandmother taught me many things about helping plants grow strong and healthy. I'd be grateful for any advice you can give me. Like I said, I'm better with hammer and nails than I am with seeds and soil." That afternoon, Ayana asked if she could explore the area around the ranch. Jacob offered to come with her, but she seemed to want some time alone. He watched from the porch as she walked toward the hills behind the barn, moving with the kind of easy grace that came from years of living close to the land. She was gone for several hours. When she returned, she was carrying a bundle of plants that Jacob didn't recognize. "For cooking," she explained when he asked about them, "and some for medicine. This land has good plants if you know where to look." That evening, Ayana prepared a simple meal using some of the plants she had gathered along with supplies from Jacob's pantry. The food had flavors he had never tasted before, earthy and complex, with a warmth that seemed to come from more than just the spices she had used. "This is incredible," he said between bites. "What did you do to make it taste like this?" "It is not complicated. Just different plants than you are used to. Many of the foods your people eat, my people have been eating for generations. We just prepare them in different ways." After dinner, they sat on the porch as the sun set behind the hills. Ranger sprawled across both their feet, completely content with the arrangement. Jacob found himself more relaxed than he had been in months. "Can I ask you something?" Ayana said eventually. "Sure. Why do you live alone out here? You seem like someone who would be good with people, but you have chosen to stay away from them." Jacob rocked slowly in his chair, considering how to answer. "I guess I got tired of trying to fit into other people's ideas of who I should be. In Germany, I was too big, too loud, too different. When I came to America, I was too foreign, too strange. Out here, I can just be myself without worrying about what anyone else thinks. But do you not get lonely?" The question caught Jacob off guard with its directness. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But lonely seemed better than constantly feeling like I didn't belong anywhere." "I understand that feeling," Ayana said quietly. "Even among my own people, I was sometimes different. I asked too many questions, wanted to learn things that women were not supposed to learn. My grandmother encouraged me, but others thought I should be more traditional." "What kind of things did you want to learn?" "Everything. How to track animals, how to read the signs that tell you when weather is coming, how to find water in dry places, how different plants can heal different sicknesses. My grandmother was a medicine woman, and she taught me many of her secrets before she died." Jacob was impressed. "Those sound like useful skills to have." "They are. But some people thought a young woman should focus on cooking and sewing and finding a husband, not on wandering the hills looking for healing plants. Their loss," Jacob said simply. "Seems to me the world needs more people who know how to heal things, not fewer." Over the next few days, they settled into an easy routine. Jacob continued his ranch work, mending fences, caring for his animals, making repairs to buildings and equipment. Ayana spent time in the garden, showing him how to identify and eliminate pests without harming the plants. She also continued exploring the surrounding area, always returning with new plants or interesting stones she had found in the evenings. They often sat on the porch talking about their different worlds. Jacob told her about Germany, about the crowded villages, and the strict social rules that had made him feel like a stranger in his own homeland. Ayana shared stories about her childhood, about learning to ride horses before she could properly walk, about the way her people moved with the seasons and lived as part of the land rather than trying to control it. "Your way sounds more peaceful," Jakob observed one night. "It was, when we were free to live it, but peaceful does not always mean easy. We had to be strong and smart to survive. Nature does not care if you make mistakes." "Same out here," Jakob agreed. "Make the wrong choice about when to plant or where to build, and you can lose everything." "But you like that challenge." "I do. I like knowing that what I build will stand. Or fall based on my own decisions, not on whether I please the right people or follow the right rules." One evening, about a week after they had arrived at the ranch, Ayana surprised Jakob by asking if she could help with the heavier ranch work. "I am strong," she said, "and I learn quickly." "I cannot stay here doing nothing while you work alone," Jakob hesitated. "It's hard work, hot, dirty, sometimes dangerous." "Do you think I'm afraid of hard work?" The challenge in her voice made Jakob smile. "No, I don't think you're afraid of anything." The next morning, Ayana worked alongside Jakob as he repaired a section of fence that had been damaged by his cattle. Winter came early that year, arriving with a fierce storm that dumped 3 feet of snow across the valley in just 2 days. Jakob had seen plenty of harsh winters, but this one seemed determined to test everything he had built. The wind howled around the house like a living thing, and the temperature dropped so low that the water in his wash basin froze solid every night. Ayana had never experienced anything quite like a Texas blizzard. Where she came from, winters were cold but manageable. This storm felt like the sky was trying to bury the entire world under a blanket of ice and snow, but she didn't complain or show fear. Instead, she helped Jakob prepare for the worst of it, moving supplies into the house and making sure the animals had adequate shelter. "Good thing we fixed that barn roof last month," Jakob said as they watched snow pile up against the windows. "Otherwise, the horses would be standing in a puddle right now." "Your grandmother would say this storm has a purpose," Ayana replied, stirring a pot of stew that filled the house with warm, savory smells. "Maybe it is keeping away something worse." "Like what?" "Who knows? Bad men, sickness, loneliness. Sometimes the earth protects us in ways we do not expect." Jakob smiled at her practical mysticism. Over the past few months, he had learned that Ayana saw connections between things that other people missed. She could predict weather changes by watching how the animals behaved, and she always seemed to know when something was about to go wrong around the ranch. The storm lasted 5 days. When it finally broke, the sun came out and turned the snow-covered valley into something that looked like a picture from a fairy tale, but the beauty came with problems. Several of Jakob's cattle had wandered away during the storm, probably looking for better shelter. Others were trapped in drifts and needed to be dug out. And worst of all, his water pump had frozen and cracked, leaving them without easy access to fresh water. "We'll have to melt snow for drinking water until I can get to town for parts," Jakob said, examining the broken pump with frustration. "Or we could dig," Ayana suggested. She was standing near the creek, which had frozen solid during the storm. "There is still water moving under the ice. I can hear it." "You want to dig through 3 feet of snow and then break through ice to get to running water?" "It would be faster than melting snow one pot at a time, and the water will be cleaner." Jakob had to admit she had a point. They spent the morning clearing snow and chipping through the ice until they had a decent water hole. It was hard work, but Ayana was right. It was much more efficient than their other options. "How did you know?" "The water was still running under there?" Jakob asked as they carried buckets of fresh water back to the house. "I grew up listening to water. Rivers and streams have their own voices. Once you learn to hear them, you always know where they are and what they are doing." It was skills like these that made Jakob realize how much Ayana had changed his life. On the ranch, things that used to take him hours to figure out, she could solve in minutes. She knew which plants could provide medicine when they ran out of store-bought remedies. She could track lost animals across terrain that looked completely unmarked to Jakob's eyes. And she had an intuitive understanding of weather patterns that helped them prepare for everything from sudden thunderstorms to extended dry spells. But it wasn't just her practical skills that made a difference. Having someone to share the daily work and conversation with had made the ranch feel like a real home instead of just a place where Jakob happened to live. They had developed an easy partnership that felt natural and comfortable. That partnership was put to the test when the real trouble arrived. It was a clear, cold morning in late winter when Jakob spotted the riders approaching from the north. 5 men on horseback, moving with the kind of purposeful determination that usually meant problems. Jakob grabbed his rifle and stepped out onto the porch. With Ayana close behind him, the riders pulled up about 20 yards from the house. Their leader was a thin man with a scraggly beard and cold eyes that took in everything about the ranch like he was making an inventory. The others looked like the kind of men who solved most of their problems with violence. "Morning," the leader called out in a voice that wasn't friendly despite the polite words. "Nice little place you got here." "Morning," Jakob replied, keeping his rifle visible but not directly threatening. "What can I do for you?" "Well, that depends. See, we've been tracking some cattle that went missing from our herd during that big storm last week. Trail led us right to this valley." Jakob felt his jaw tighten. "I haven't seen any stray cattle. All the animals on my land belong to me, and I can prove it." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's an interesting claim, friend. Mind if we take a look around your property? Just to make sure there's been no misunderstanding?" "I mind plenty. This is private land and you're not welcome here." The tension in the air grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Jakob could see the other riders shifting in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. These weren't honest ranchers looking for lost cattle. These were rustlers who had decided that Jakob's isolated ranch would make an easy target. "Now, that's not very neighborly," the leader said, his false politeness starting to slip. "We're just trying to recover our property. No need to make this difficult." "The only thing that's going to be difficult is explaining to the sheriff why you're trespassing on my land after. I've told you to leave. Sheriff's a long way from here, friend. And accidents can happen to folks who don't know how to be reasonable." That was when Ayana stepped forward. Jakob had been so focused on the confrontation that he hadn't noticed her moving, but suddenly she was beside him on the porch, her hand resting on the hunting knife she wore at her belt. "These men are liars," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the yard. "They have no lost cattle. They came here to steal what belongs to you." The leader's eyes fixed on Ayana with surprise and something uglier. Well. Didn't expect to find a squaw playing house with our friend here." "That's an interesting arrangement you got going, mister." Jakob felt anger surge through him like fire. The disrespect in the man's voice and the crude way he looked at Ayana made Jakob want to put a bullet through him right then and there, but he forced himself to stay calm. 5 against 2 weren't good odds, especially when Ayana could get caught in the crossfire. "You need to leave," Jakob said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Right now, or what? You and your Indian girlfriend are going to make us?" That was the moment when Ayana surprised everyone, including Jakob, instead of backing down or showing fear. She stepped to the edge of the porch and spoke in a voice that carried the kind of authority that comes from absolute confidence. "Look around you," she said to the riders. "Look at the hills, the tree line, the rocks above the valley. What do you see?" The men glanced around nervously, suddenly aware that they were sitting in the middle of an open valley surrounded by potential hiding spots. "I see good places for someone to hide while they pick off unwelcome visitors one by one," the leader said with forced bravado. "Exactly. And how do you know there is no one hiding there right now? How do you know that my people are not watching you at this very moment, waiting to see if you will leave peacefully or if they need to defend this place?" It was a complete bluff, but Ayana delivered it with such conviction that Jakob almost believed it himself. The rustlers clearly didn't know what to think. They looked around the valley with new suspicion, seeing potential threats in every shadow. "You're Lying, one of them said, but his voice lacked confidence. Am I? Are you willing to bet your life on that? Because if you try to take what belongs to this man, you will find out just how good Comanche warriors are at making enemies disappear. The leader studied Ayana's face, trying to decide if she was telling the truth. Jacob could see doubt creeping into his expression. The isolation that made this ranch attractive to rustlers also made it the perfect place for an ambush, and everyone knew that Comanche fighters were not to be taken lightly. 5 armed men against 1 giant and 1 woman, the leader said, but he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. 5 men who will be buried in unmarked graves if they make the wrong choice, Ayana replied calmly. The question is whether you are smart enough to ride away while you still can. The standoff stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes. Jacob kept his rifle ready, watching for any sign that the situation was about to turn violent. But gradually the doubt in the rustlers' faces grew stronger than their greed. This isn't over, the leader finally said, but he was already pulling his horse's reins around. We'll be keeping an eye on this place. You do that, Jacob replied, but keep it from a distance. The 5 riders left the way they had come, but Jacob noticed they kept looking over their shoulders and rode much faster than they had approached. They were clearly worried about phantom warriors that existed only in Ayana's bold imagination. When the riders were finally out of sight, Jacob turned to Ayana with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. That was the gutsiest thing I've ever seen. How did you know that would work? I did not know, she admitted with a small smile. But frightened. Men make poor decisions. Spring arrived like a gift after the harsh winter. The snow melted away to reveal green grass pushing up through the earth, and wildflowers began dotting the hillsides with splashes of yellow and purple. Jacob had always enjoyed this time of year, but watching Ayana discover the beauty of his valley in bloom made it feel like he was seeing it for the first time himself. She spent hours walking through the meadows, gathering plants and flowers that most people would consider weeds, but that she knew had value as medicine or food. Sometimes Jacob would find her sitting perfectly still beside the creek, just watching the water flow past like she was reading a story written in the current. What do you see when you look at the water like that? He asked one morning as he joined her by the stream. Everything, she said simply. Where it has been, where it is going, what it has picked up along the way. Water tells stories if you know how to listen. What stories is it telling today? Ayana smiled and pointed upstream. It says there was a bear drinking at the bend yesterday morning, a mother with cubs, probably. And it says the rains will come again soon, maybe tomorrow night? Jacob looked at the clear blue sky with not a cloud in sight. You can tell that from looking at the water? The water, the wind, the way the birds are flying. Everything is connected. My grandmother taught me to read these signs when I was very young. Sure enough, it rained that night. A gentle spring shower that soaked the earth and left everything smelling fresh and clean. Jacob woke to the sound of droplets on the roof and found himself smiling. He was getting used to Ayana being right about things that seemed impossible to predict, but spring also brought visitors that neither of them had expected. It was a warm afternoon in late April when Jacob spotted a group of riders approaching from the south. This time there were only 3 of them, and they moved with the careful, deliberate pace of people who weren't looking for trouble. As they got closer, Jacob could see that 2 of them were older Comanche men, while the third appeared to be younger, maybe in his 20s. Ayana had seen them too. She stood on the porch beside Jacob, but her posture was different than it had been during the confrontation with the rustlers. There was tension in her shoulders, but also something that might have been hope. The riders stopped a respectful distance from the house. The older of the 2 men raised his hand in greeting and called out in the Comanche language. Ayana answered, in the same tongue, and Jacob could hear the emotion in her voice even though he couldn't understand the words. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Ayana occasionally gesturing toward Jacob or the ranch buildings. Finally, she turned to him with tears in her eyes. They are my family, she said quietly, my uncle and my cousin. They have been searching for me since the river crossing last fall. Jakob felt a complicated mix of emotions wash over him. He was happy that Ayana had found her family, but he also felt a sharp pang of loss at the thought of her leaving. Over the past months, he had grown so accustomed to sharing his life with her that he couldn't imagine going back to the solitary existence he had lived before. "What do they want?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "They want to make sure I am safe and well, and they want to understand why I have chosen to stay here instead of joining the rest of our people on the reservation." The 3 Comanche men dismounted and approached the porch. Ayana made introductions, speaking first in her native language and then translating for Jakob. The older man was her uncle, whose name meant strong wind in English. The younger man was her cousin, called Swift Horse. The third man was a friend who had helped them search for her. Strong Wind studied Jakob with sharp, intelligent eyes that reminded him strongly of Ayana. When he spoke, his English was accented, but clear. "My niece tells me you have been good to her, that you took her in when she had nowhere to go and asked nothing in return." "She's been good to me too," Jakob replied honestly. "This place is better with her here. She also tells me that you fought beside her against men who would have stolen your cattle. She's the one who sent them running with nothing but words. I was ready to start shooting, but she found a smarter way." Strong Wind nodded approvingly. Ayana was always clever, sometimes too clever for her own good. He looked around the ranch, taking in the well-maintained buildings and the healthy animals grazing in the corrals. "You have built something good here." "We have," Jakob corrected gently. "Ayana has done as much work as I have to make this place what it is." That seemed to surprise Strong Wind, though he tried not to show it. "Among our people, men and women have different roles. But Ayana was always different, always wanting to learn things that others thought she should not know." "Maybe that's why she fits so well here," Jakob suggested. "Out here, anyone who can do the work is welcome to do it, regardless of what other people think they should be doing." Swift Horse, who had been quiet during the conversation, finally spoke up. "What are your intentions toward my cousin?" he asked bluntly. The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Jakob glanced at Ayana, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. This was the conversation he had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. "I care about her," Jakob said carefully. "More than I thought I could care about anyone. If she wants to stay here, I'd like her to stay. If she wants to go with you, I'll understand." "That is not what I asked," Swift Horse said firmly. "I asked about your intentions. Do you mean to make her your wife, or do you see her as convenient help around your ranch?" Jakob felt heat rise in his cheeks. The young man's directness was uncomfortable, but he respected it. These people had come a long way to find Ayana, and they deserved honest answers. "I would be honored if she would consider becoming my wife," Jakob said, looking directly at Ayana as he spoke. "But that's her choice to make, not mine." Ayana's eyes widened slightly, and Jakob realized that despite all the time they had spent together, they had never actually talked about marriage. It had seemed like something that might happen eventually, but saying it out loud made it suddenly real and immediate. Strong Wind looked back and forth between Jakob and Ayana, reading the emotions on both their faces. "And you, niece, what do you want?" Ayana was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice was steady but full of feeling. "I have been happy here," she said. "Happier than I have been since I was a child. Jakob has never tried to change who I am or make me into someone else. He values my knowledge and my skills. He treats me as an equal partner, not as property or as a burden." She paused, looking around at the ranch that had become her home. "I love our people and our traditions, but I also love the life I have built here. I love the work we do together, the quiet evenings by the fire, the way we can sit in comfortable silence or talk for hours about anything." She turned to look directly at Jakob. "And I love him, though I was not sure he felt the same way until just now." The admission hit Jakob like a physical blow. He had hoped she cared for him, had seen signs that suggested she did, but hearing Her say the words out loud filled him with a joy so intense it was almost overwhelming. "I love you too," he said simply. "More than I knew it was possible to love anyone." Strong Wind watched this exchange with the expression of someone who was seeing exactly what he had expected to see. "My niece has always been wise about people," he said to Jakob. "If she has chosen you, then you must be a good man." The conversation continued for hours. Ayana's family wanted to hear everything about how she had survived since the river crossing, about the life she had built at the ranch, and about her plans for the future. Jakob found himself impressed by their intelligence and their genuine concern for Ayana's well-being. These weren't people who would try to force her into a decision. She didn't want to make dot as the sun began to set. Strong Wind made an announcement that surprised everyone. "We have found what we came looking for," he said. "Ayana is safe and happy, and she has chosen her path. But we would like to stay for a few days if you will have us. It has been too long since our family was together." Jakob immediately agreed. And they spent the evening making arrangements for the visitors. Ayana's family would camp by the creek, close enough to visit easily but far enough away to give everyone privacy. Over the next 3 days, Jakob got to know Ayana's uncle and cousin as individuals rather than just as representatives of her past. Strong Wind was a thoughtful man who asked intelligent questions about ranch management and seemed genuinely interested in understanding how Jakob and Ayana worked together. Swift Horse was more reserved, but Jakob could see that he cared deeply about his cousin's happiness. On the third evening, as they all sat around the fire by the creek, Strong Wind made another announcement. "Tomorrow we will return to our people," he said. "But before we go, there is something we would like to do." He looked at Jakob and Ayana, who were sitting close together on a fallen log. "If you truly wish to marry, we would be honored to perform a ceremony that honors both your traditions and ours." The suggestion caught both Jakob and Ayana off guard. They had talked about marriage during the past few days, but they hadn't made any specific plans. What would that involve? Jakob asked.